Hi friend, it's story time again. Tonight we're cracking open a rickety door and sneaking you into a sub-minus dark street just before the sun even thinks about showing its pale face. You're not some fancy top-minus-hatted gentleman tonight. No silk gloves, no soft bed to curl back into. Nope. You're a good old ordinary worker in Victorian Britain. And guess what's waiting for you the second you try to rub the sleep from your eyes? That's right, dry crumbs. Lots of them. Enough to choke you back awake before the factory whistle does. If you're ready to unwin, maybe press like or subscribe. Only if it feels gentle and right for you. And I'd love to know where in the world are you listening from? And what time is it there? Now, let the room grow quiet. Let your breath slow. Let the story begin. Your eyelids fight you as you sit up on a straw mattress that smells like damp rags. Your toes curl against a floor that's colder than the outside street, which, by the way, is already filling with the squeak of carts and the muffled curses of neighbors who wish it was Monday again. You reach for the same old cloth bundle tucked near your boots breakfast. Well, if you can call it that. 2 pieces of bread that might have been fresh when the baker pulled them out of the oven yesterday if you'd been first in line. But you weren't. You were 3rd or 4th or maybe 10th. So what you've got now is half a loaf gone hard at the edges, crumbly in the middle, wrapped in yesterday's newsprint that bleeds ink onto your thumb when you press too hard. Some historians like to say the working poor survived on basic staples, which sounds neat and tidy when you're reading it in a big quiet library. But right here, in your tiny room with the cracked window letting in the cold morning fog, basic means bread so dry you have to break it against your knee. If you're lucky, a flake drifts into your sleeve instead of down the back of your shirt. The smell isn't bad. Stale bread smells like stale bread. Better than the coal smoke drifting in from the street, or the mold creeping around the ceiling corners, or the thick layer of soot that clings to your fingernails no matter how hard you scrub them. You don't get tea yet. That's for later. If you can snatch a spoonful of leaves someone else didn't pinch first. Right now it's just you, your bread, and your stubborn teeth that haven't fallen out yet. You bite down. Crumbs crackle. A piece wedges itself behind a molar. Good luck fishing that out before lunch. Did you know some workers soften bread by soaking it in ale instead of water? Not because it tasted better, though some swore it did, but because the ale was safer than the tap water half the time. The water pipes could carry anything from last week's sewer leak to bits of rust that made your gut twist for days. A warm pint, even stale, was more trustworthy than the city's pipes. Of course, historians still argue whether people really preferred the taste of bread soaked in bitter beer, or if they just liked not having to spend the whole week doubled over from bad water. You, right now, would probably take the pint if someone offered. You turn your crust over in your hands like maybe. Just maybe, the underside will be softer. It isn't. So you scrape the crumbly bit with your thumbnail. Collect the dusty flakes in your palm, and tip them straight into your mouth. Better crumbs now than a growing belly with a factory floor rattles to life and the foreman's stick taps your back to remind you that sleep is for people with softer jobs. You wrap what's left of the bread back up in the newsprint. You'll save the last bite for later, maybe dunk it in that half-minus mug of tea you hope someone left steeping on the communal hearth downstairs. If you're really lucky, you'll find a scrap of bacon rind stuck in the ashes. Someone's dropped treasure, half-minus charred, still salty. For now, though, it's just you and the sound of the street waking up outside your thin door. The creak of wagon wheels, the snap of reins, the low mutter of your neighbor swearing under his breath because his breakfast looks exactly like yours, dry, stubborn, not nearly enough. One more mouthful. One more morning you'd ought let hunger win before you step out into the soot and steam and clatter that I'll own your daylight hours until the lamps sputter awake at dusk. You stand. Brush crumbs from your sleeves. Sling your waxed cotton coat over your shoulder. The bread was never going to fill you, but it's a star-take-rum trail to follow until the next meal, the next shift, the next day when you'll crack open that cloth, undle again and pray tomorrow's loaf isn't harder than your boots. You close your door behind you with a shove of your elbow because your hands are busy trying to keep the last chunk of bread from tumbling into the street muck. The dawn drags its gray belly across the rooftops as you step out, the cold morning air sharp enough to make your teeth ache well. The teeth you still have. You shift the bread from one hand to the other, tearing at the edge with the side of your thumb. It doesn't bend. It snaps. You wince as a crumb bounces off your collar. This isn't the soft white loaf you might see in a shop window if you ever had a shiny coin spare. This is yesterday's bread. Maybe the day before us. Maybe, if you're really down on your luck, someone else's crust. Half mine is pinched from the night watchman's kitchen table when he was looking. Victorian city streets at this smell like whetstone and coal smoke. They taste like soot when you breathe too deep. You lean against a lamppost to gnaw at the edge of your breakfast, tongue pressing against the sharp crust that wants to scratch your gums raw. If you were a wealthier sort, say, a shopkeeper's clerk or a mill's supervisor, this might be the hour for a soft roll with butter. Maybe jam if you're feeling scandalously fancy. But you're not. Your teeth dig in anyway. Bread this dry takes effort. You wedge the crust against your molars, grind down until the edge cracks enough for you to tear it free. If you think that sounds dramatic, try going through it with half your back teeth gone, which isn't rare if you've been in the factory since your age still had one digit. Historians love to scribble about working class diets. Bread formed the staple. They say neat and detached. What they don't mention is how many mouths learned to soften stale bread with spit, or dunk it in weak tea brewed so thin you could see the bottom of the mug. Sometimes you see old folks with no teeth at all, just soft gums and a stubborn jaw, working at their crusts like it's the only thing they know how to chew. Because, in a way, it is. You chew slower now, mindful of the small stone that might be hiding in the flour, a bit of grit from the millstone that didn't get sifted out before the dough hit the oven. Crack that between your last molar and you'll be gumming your bread, like the old man down the alley who swears he once ate steak bat when his gums were red instead of pale. A horse cart rattles by, whilst clacking against uneven cobbles. The driver eyes your crust with the same look you'd give a dog licking bones. HES probably got the same breakfast wedged in his coat pocket, wrapped in yesterday's news of wars and trade routes and prices hell never see inside his own purse. There's a rumor, whispered between weary bites behind workhouse doors, that bakers used to sweep up leftover flour from the floor to stretch their dough. True or not, it doesn't matter much when you're too busy hoping your next bite will chip a tooth. You lean back against the lamppost, break off another piece. The edge digs under your thumbnail, rough and stale, but still your only defense against a belly that'll howl like a factory steam whistle once your shift starts. Some mornings you daydream a warm roll, soft enough to tear with your fingers, butter thick enough to drip down your wrist. A proper baker's loaf, fresh and fluffy, delivered by a boy in a crisp apron. You almost laugh at yourself. It's the use in dreams when your real breakfast is gnawed from the same crust that ride your coat pocket until noon. A neighbor shuffles past, eyes red from coal smoke or lack of sleep or both. He tips his cap, lifts a matching crust in greeting. No words. You nod back, mouth busy prying off another stubborn bite. The sun finally drags itself over the rooftop edge, catching in the greasy window panes across the street. You squint against the glow-warm fuel never feel once the factory floor swallows you whole. Historians still bicker about whether workers really had it as bad as the stories say. Some claim there was always a fresh loaf if you saved right. If you didn't drink it away at the alehouse, maybe some did. Maybe you will too. Maybe you will too. Someday when your boots don't have holes, when your hands don't smell like sudden cold metal. For now, you finish the last mouthful. crumbs catch in your sleeve. You flick them away, watch them drift onto the street, joining ash and horse dung and all the other bits of the city that stick to your soles as you shuffle toward the factory gates. Your belly isn't full, but it's quiet enough, and quiet is good enough for a morning like this. You step away from the lamppost with the crumbs still tucked in the corner of your mouth, half hoping it'll fool your stomach into thinking you've got more waiting at home. The street greets you with its usual chorus of hawkers shouting about yesterday's onions. The clop of hooves slipping on wet stones, the faint hiss of steam leaking from pipes somewhere you can't see. Your boots slap through puddles that weren't here last night train. Or maybe a pipe cracked again in the alley behind the brewery. Either way, you skirt around it like it might swallow your last crumb hole, if you're not careful. You keep one eye out for the man with the big tin kettle. He's old enough to be every Otis grandpa, shoulders hunched like a question mark under a threadbare coat that smells like stale tea leaves. If you're lucky, he'll be standing at the corner with his battered tin cup stacked by his boots, ready to sell you a scoop of what passes for breakfast when dry bread won't do. Watery oats, steam curling out in wisps that disappear before they warm your fingers. You spot him where the road dips by the brick wall. He nods at you as you shuffle closer. No words, he just gestures at the dented kettle and lifts the lid so the smell can reach you. It's not sweet. It's not rich. It's a smell like damp grain and ashes, but when your belly's empty, it might as well be roast beef. You fish out a half-minus penny from your coat pocket, the edge of the coin biting your cold fingers. He drops a scoop into a tin cup, sloshing gray shoats that cling to the rim. You blow across the top, watch the steam drift away. The first spoonful hits your tongue lukewarm and gritty, soft enough to swallow without a fight, rough enough to remind you you're alive. Historians write about porridge as the backbone of the working poor's breakfast-day cheat meal, simple and filling if you had a good scoop. What they skip over is how often that scoop is half water, half yesterday's scrapings boiled again and again, until the grains surrender all their secrets to the broth. By the time it reaches your tin cup, the oats are so thin they slip through your teeth like weak soup. A boy about your age elbows in beside you, tin cup already rattling in his hands. His spoon scrapes so loud you flinch. He grins at you through a mouthful of porridge so thin it drips from his chin. Better than chewing rocks, he mutters between bites. You nod. Yes, right. Your breath fogs the tin as you scrape the last bit from the bottom. One stubborn note claims to the curve. You chase it with your finger, licking the grit from your knuckle like it's the best bite you've had in weeks. Maybe it is. The kettleman collects your empty cup. He wipes it on his sleeve before stacking it back with the others. Someone else will hold it tomorrow. Scrape at the same faint scratch on the rim, hope for a thicker. You head down the street again, belly slightly less hollow. The sun has climbed just high enough to make the chimney smoke glow soft gold for a heartbeat before it slips back into gray. Your boots slip once on a slick patch of mud. You catch yourself on a wall that leaves a chalky smear on your coat sleeve. You think about the men who work at the big flour mill by the river. They see more oats in a day than you'll ever taste in a week. Some slip a handful into a pocket when no one's looking, carry it home like a stolen coin. The foreman pretends he doesn't notice sometimes. Other times, he makes an example out of the poor fool who thought a handful of dry grain was worth a lash across the back. Some scholars argue about how hungry the working poor really were. They'll write long pages about porridge, about loaves and crumbs and bowls scraped clean before dawn. But they can't taste the ash that clings to the tin cup, or the way the last oat sticks to your teeth like a tiny promise that you'll still be standing when the factory bell rings. A bell chimes up the street now. Dull, rusty, the same note that's pulled you from your arm since you were old enough to reach the latch on your door. You hitch your coat tighter around your ribs. Wipe your thumb across your lips to catch any last taste of porridge that might be hiding there. The street hums with boots like yours, feet dragging through puddles and horse muck, bellies full of nothing much more than a mouthful of grit and a hope that lunchtime will come faster than the foreman's bark. You tug the stylus stub from your pocket, an old habit, your scrap of chalk for marking deliveries later, or for scribbling your name on the crate that claims your spot in the workshop. You turn it over in your palm, wish it were a spoon instead. Maybe later it will be. Maybe someone will slip you a second scoop if you smile at the kettle man again tomorrow. For now, the oats settle warm enough in your belly to hush the worst growl. The street swallows you up, carrying you forward on a tide of boots and breath and steam that smells faintly of yesterday's porridge reheated one too many times. You wipe your lips with the back of your sleeve, careful not to waste the last ghost of oat grit still stuck there. The warmth in your belly is thin but stubborn. It lingers just long enough to fool your ribs into believing you've had a proper breakfast. Almost. You drift along the street's muddy edge where puddles reflect the chimneys overhead, each brick stack coughing up ribbons of smoke that smell like scorched coal and burned toast. You'd swear someone's frying bacon if you didn't know better. If you didn't know that smell is just yesterday's ashes clinging to fresh kindling in some landlord's cheap hearth. Your boots tap a slow rhythm on the cobbles, and soon you smell it properly, salt and sour. A twist of something sharp that cuts through the coal stink. You follow it on instinct. Your stomach perks up, as if hoping for a miracle. You find him leaning against a brick wall, an old man in a coat patched so many times it's more stitched than fabric now. Beside him sits a battered basket lined with yellowed cloth. Inside, rows of cold, grayish fillets laid over each other like damp pages in a book no one wants to open. Salt herring, maybe spirits if you're lucky. Fish so cheap even the cats in the alley get bored of sniffing around them. He doesn't shout like the bread hawker or the kettle man. He just nods at you once, eyes the coin you roll between your thumb and forefinger. You hesitate. Spend your last copper on a strip of cold fish before the foreman's whistle. Worth it? You flick in your coin. He slips you a chunk wrapped in yesterday's scrap of newsprint, same headlines you read off someone else's crust this morning, now soaked with brine and smelling like the sea you've never seen except in your imagination. You perch on a low stone step to unwrap your prize. The fish is cold, limp, and salt crusts your fingertips before you even tear the first bite free with your teeth. It's tough at the edges. Slick in the middle, your teeth do half the job, your tongue the rest, nudging the bones aside before they wedge somewhere they shouldn't. Historians scribble about the salt-fished raid like it was an exotic import for the rich. Maybe once. But here in the workman's street, salt fish is a lifeline. Protein you can afford if you close your eyes and don't gag on the smell. Some say Victorian workers ate cheese every morning, but cheese cost more than fish half the time if you found a wedge that hadn't gone green at the edges first. So fish it is. Fish and stale bread. If you're lucky, a smear of something to cut the salt. A knob of old butter, if someone at home hasn't licked the dish clean already. You glance up as a cart rattles past, iron wheels squealing over the cobblestones. A dog lopes behind it, nose lifted, tail wagging when it catches the scent from your paper. You guard your fish with an elbow. This bite cost you a penny you could have kept for lunch. No dogs getting it now. The fish flakes easier near the spine, soft enough that you could almost pretend it's fresh. It isn't, of course. It's been hauled in barrels from some fog mine, soaked dock, brined, until it could float to your street on its own if the cart ever lost a wheel. Some factory boys say the smell clings to you for days, that a salted fish breakfast will perfume your breath, until even your mates step back when you shout over the machinery as clang. Maybe they're right, but better to stink of fish than to wheeze through an empty belly while your hammer hand slips at the wrong moment. You tear off another shred, suck the salt from your thumb, and glance around. Two girls shuffle past with baskets balanced on their hips. Bare feet slapping cold stone. One eyes your fish. You break off the tail, flick it toward her. She snatches it mid-minus air. Grins with more teeth than you'd expect for a kid who probably chews bread crusts for dinner too. You finish what's left, wipe the brine onto your coat hem. The paper goes into your pocket. Someone might need to wrap a crust later. Nothing goes to waste here, not even newsprint that's more whole than page. Some scholars argue over whether these fish breakfasts were healthy. Plenty of salt, they say, enough to keep you standing. Enough protein to build muscle if you're lucky. Others say the salt was half poison in bodies that drank more beer than water to rinse it away. They're probably all right. And all wrong, might. Because you don't have time to care about tomorrow's kidneys when your belly wants something now. The church bell calls out the hour low and heavy, rattling off stone and soot. Works start soon. Your gut clenches around the salt in the cold fish, oil sliding down your throat. It's not enough to fill you, but it's enough to make the empty parts stay quiet until you hear the next whistle or smell the next excuse for food drifting down the street. You stand. Your boots scrape the step as you head for the gates. The salt clings to your fingertips, your sleeve, the corner of your mouth. The foreman won't care. He probably stinks of herring himself. And tomorrow? Maybe bread again. Maybe oats. Maybe nothing. Or maybe another old man with a basket of fish that smells just strong enough to remind you you're still alive. You step into the yard behind the factory just before the whistle wails. Around you, boots scuff over grit and strake oil. Steam rises from iron pipes that hiss like tired snakes. Your fingers still smell like old herring sharpened saw. But it's better than the stale air waiting inside those brick walls. There's a corner where the boys gather before the first bell. Half shelter, half gossip spot. Half breakfast table when someone's lucky enough to sneak in something that didn't come wrapped in last week's news. The talk isn't about the foreman's bad knee or who tripped over the loom yesterday. It's about a rumor. A bone rumor. You wedge your shoulders between two older lads, your back pressed to cold brick, your waxed coats, if for the blind ride. One of them pulls out a scrap of cloth from his coat pocket. A shard of beef bone, browned at the ends where it was boiled near to powder. He lifts it like a relic. The rest of you lean closer. A good bone means good broth means a warm sip to keep your hand steady when the hammer starts to slip, or the bobbin squeaks wrong at speed. He passes it to the boy next to him, who sniffs it first, always a risk. To freshen, you know HES, line. To olden, you're better off gnawing your boots. This one's just right. The smell is half marrow, half soot. Proof someone's ma or da had the luck to buy a butcher's scrap before the rest were picked clean. Some historians like to say factory families made miracles out of scraps, turning bones and skin and the last glog of drippings into us to grand enough to trick your belly for a day or two. They're not wrong, but they miss the part where you sometimes eat the same bone twice. You pass the shard to your left, fingers brushing the grit off the corner before you give it a lick. Don't flinch. It's normal. A bit of salt, a whisper of fat that's more memory than meal. You swear you taste the roast that never was. The boy who brought it grins, teeth half as bright as his pride. He brags about how they boiled it 3 hours last night, all hunched round the hearth while the fire spat sparks at the damp walls. First round broth for ma and dough. Second round dough. Thinner, but good enough to dunk stale crusts so they don't break your jaw. Third round? That's the rumor. If you're desperate enough, you dry the bone and carry it to work. A snack, if you squint at it sideways. You nudge your wax board bag aside and flick a crumb off your coat cuff. No broth for you last night, just the stale crust. No softening splash to help it along. But the taste of that borrowed bone sits on your tongue now, tricking your gut into thinking it's full of warm drippings and pepper. The whistle screams overhead. Conversation dies like a snuffed candle. You slip your wax board under your arm, push through the knot of boys toward the door where the foreman's shadow stretches long and narrow against the brick. Inside, the factory air wraps around you like an old wet blanket. Steam, oil, coal smoke. Sweat. It's heavy but familiar, a smell you can almost believe means wages and dinner if you make it to dusk without slipping a finger under the loom. You wedge into your place, shoulders brushing shoulders, feet planted on sticky boards that remember every heel that's ever pressed them down. Somewhere in your coat pocket, a crumb of crust waits. Maybe for lunch, maybe for a late bite if the afternoon drags longer than your knees can stand. A sharp tap from the foreman's cane snaps you out of your drift. You nod once. Eyes down. You know what he wants, focus, hands steady. No dreaming about bones and broth, while the gears spin too fast for your thumb to dodge. Still, you can't help it. Between turns of the wheel, your mind drifts back to that splinter of beef bone. Maybe tonight, you'll find a butcher's boy who'll slip you a scrap for a penny. Maybe you'll hunch by the fire till your eyes water from the smoke, waiting for the marrow to melt into something that almost tastes like hope. Some scholars say the Victorian worker's life was all bread and ale, thin porridge and cheap cheese, but you know it's bones too. Bones that get sucked, boiled, scraped clean, and licked until they're just memories rattling at the bottom of your coat pocket. The gears rattle. The belt shudders. The whistle above your head gives one last warning squeal. You tighten your grip. Blink coal dust from your lashes and hold on to the taste of that bone as if it's enough to carry you through till dusk. When the hammer clangs against the frame and your arm makes to your elbow, your gut growls like a restless dog. But you hush it. After all, you've got work to do. And maybe, if you're lucky, tomorrow morning you'll have a bone of your own. When the shift bell clangs you out into the yard at midday, your arms feel like they belong to someone else, someone older. Someone whose elbows already ache when rain creeps down the alleyway. You rub your palm across your coat sleeve to flick off the smear of oil and soot that no cloth ever really lifts. Your belly, it's been gnawing at itself for hours. Your thin slice of fish long gone. Your crust gone to nibble during a stolen pause while the foreman's back was turned. So now you stand there in the yard, boots caked in the same grit that lies under your fingernails, sniffing the air like a stray looking for scraps. And then, like a secret, the smell drifts in. A whiff of something softer than salt fish and sharper than stale bread, potato skins roasting in ash. You follow the smell on instinct, weaving through boys and men hunched against the wall. Each guarding whatever meager lunch they brought in a handkerchief or an old tin. Near the corner where the brick dips into a half-minus sheltered nook, you find it a tin bucket propped over dying coals. Half a dozen lads squatting around it like priests at a sacred fire. One holds a stick, prodding at what's inside. You see pale curls of potato peel, charred at the tips, spitting tiny sparks when they catch a lick of flame. No whole potato, here just the skins. Someone's mother peeled them last night for us you probably didn't taste. Instead of tossing the scraps to the pigs, she tied them in a cloth, slipped them into her boy's pocket with a wink. Roast them if you get a chance. You hover at the edge of the circle, boots squeaking against the ash-minus street cobbles. The boy with the stick lifts an eyebrow, flicks you a look that says, you sharing it or just sniffing? You dig in your pocket for the coin you don't have. Pat your coat for crumbs you already ate. Nothing. But hunger makes you bold, you tap the fingers to your chest, then point at the bucket. He snorts but shifts over, making a space wide enough for your knee. He breaks off a half-minus burned scrap. Its edges crispy. Its middle soft enough to tear with your teeth. You bite in smoky bitter, dusted with something sharp you guess is salt or ash or both. Better than stale crust. Better than empty. Some historians call these makeshift lunches working-minus class thrift. They like to spin long lines about how the poor wasted nothing skin, bone, peel. Even the soot that flavors every bite. But the taste in your mouth isn't thrift, it's survival. It's the sharp smack of salt on your tongue reminding you you're not alone here in the corner. Knee to knee with boys who know exactly how a cold belly can bend your spine faster than any Formanesque cane. One lad pulls out a twist of cloth, unties it to reveal a dab of drippings pinched from last night's roast. If you can call a thin slice of gristle a roast. He dips his peel, passes the cloth on. You do the same, swiping your scrap through the greasy smear, licking your lips so no drop escapes. Someone laughs when a peel slips from another boy's fingers, lands in the ashes, and disappears under a boot heel. Ash counts as flavor, he jokes. H.E.S. right, here. Dirt and grit and a hint of coldest are part of the meal. A distant bell rings, one of the big iron ones from the factory clock. Not the start bell. Not yet. Just a warning that the brake's half-minus spent, the whistle ready to yank you back to the loom, or the hammer or the pipes that hiss all day like restless snakes. You gnaw your last peel down to a thin rind, flick the edge into the bucket's dying coals. The boy with the stick pokes at it once more, chasing a fresh flame that never comes. The circle breaks apart like soap bubbles poppings. Quiet nods, elbows brushing as you push to your feet. You brush ash from your knee, roll your shoulders to shake off the cold that never quite leaves your coat, and slip your hands back into your pockets to feel for anything crumbs, coins, luck. You find nothing but the warm ghost of salt on your fingertips, the faint smoke in your hair that'll claim all shift long. Some scholars still argue if these scraps kept anyone strong. Maybe they did. Maybe they didn't. But you know one thing, hunger doesn't care how thin the peel is, or how soft your bite is if your teeth are chipped from yesterday's crust. Hunger wants the belly quiet, and for a moment, just a moment it is. You catch the boy with the sticks one last time before you slip back toward the factory door. He nods, tiny as a coal spark. You nod back. No thanks, need. You both know the rules. Share the peel today. Hope for a bone tomorrow. Guard each other's bellies in the gaps between the whistles call. And when the loom's rattle drowns out your thoughts in an hour, the taste of ash and salt will linger just long enough to remind you your belly isn't empty yet. You push through the factory door again, belly warm from the faint taste of roasted peels and shared salt. The whistle shrieks overhead, a thin, slicing cry that cuts through the yard chatter and buries itself in your ear so deep you'll still hear it echo when you're an old man with bad knees and stories nobody wants to hear. Inside, the air closes over you like a damp coat. Steam hisses. Iron rattles. Boots shuffle to their places. Somewhere down the line, a hammer clangs. Quick and mean, like it's reminding you who's really in charge. Hit, not you. You slip into your corner, plant your feet just so on the boards that remember every heel that's ever worn them thin. The foreman stalks past, eyes flicking at your hands, your shoulders, your chin. He doesn't care what you had for breakfast, he only cares that you don't faint before dusk. And you won't. Not yet. Because now and then you get lucky enough to have a bit more than bread or a stolen potato peel to chew. Sometimes, when the stars align and your neighbor owes you a favor, there's tea. Not the fancy leaves that rich folk brew in china pots you to break just by looking at them. No, your tea is mostly wishful thinking, a cracked tin half-minus full of yesterday's sweepings from the bottom of a grocer's barrel. Flecks of dust, a pinch of grit that might be straight wigs for all you know. At break, you and two boys from the line slip outside to the back alley behind the coal shed. There's a battered kettle perched on 3 bricks someone's prize from who knows when, dented but proud. The trick is to keep it just hot enough that the leaves pretend to wake up again. One boy guards the matchbox like it's the king's crown jewels. You crouch low, your coat hand grazing the muddy brick. Stirs with the tip of a pocket knife. You watch the water swirl, catching flecks of rust from the kettle's belly. You'd flinch if you had the luxury. Today, you just breathe it in like a blessing. They pass you the first tin mug chipped at the lip, handle wired back on twice. You sip slow. The taste is bitter flat, and faintly sour, but warm, blessedly warm. It slides down your throat like a promise that the next shift might not break you in half. Historians sometimes scribble about the Victorian working man's tea habit like it was an elegant ritual. What they don't say is that half the time, there was no leaf left at all, just boiling water poured through the same handful of scraps again and again until the pot ran clear. Some say people reused leaves, 3 for times. Some swear the record was 7. The truth is, nobody really counted. You don't count when your belly's empty. You just keep pouring until it tastes like water and hope the warmth sticks around longer than the taste does. You pass the mud on. The next boy blows across the surface like HES taming soup. He grins at you over the rim to front teeth gone, knocked loose by a flying crate last winter. Doesn't slow him down one bit. Somewhere past the alley wall, you hear the foreman spark. Brake's nearly done. You swallow its left in the bottom of your throat, the grit of leaf us catching behind your teeth. Better than nothing. Everything's better than nothing. A cold wind snakes down the alley just as you stand. You tuck your chin into your coat, cup your hands around the last heat clinging to your fingers. The tin mud playing casts back into the kettle, ready for whoever needs the next splash. You brush your palm on your coat, black streaks of old leaf, coal, rust. Marks that say you took what you could when you could. Nobody will care when you're back at your station, shoulders hunched over the same piece of stubborn iron that never seems to listen to your hammer. Some scholars debate whether tea gave workers the energy to last the day. Some say it ruined their teeth, replaced proper food, turned bellies to water instead of bread. Maybe so, though when you press your hands to your ribs and feel that little flicker of warmth flowing there like a coal under damp ash, you'd take one more cup. Always. You step back inside as the foreman's shadow crosses the doorway. He doesn't see the tea stain on your collar. Or maybe he doesn't, just knows there's no point barking about it. Nobody's belly stays quiet on plain steam and good intentions alone. The whistle snaps once more. Your hands find their place. The iron rattles. The day drags on, loud and low like it always does. But your belly hums, soft enough that your knees don't buckle just yet. And tomorrow, maybe the kettle's still there. Maybe the leaves last one more swirl through water that tastes more like hope than dust. Maybe that's enough. The afternoon stretch inside the factory feels like it wants to bend your spine into a hook. Your shoulders ache where the hammer's handle rubs them raw. The smell of oil and sweat sticks to your hair, so thick it feels like a second skin. You roll your tongue around your mouth, chasing a phantom crumb that isn't there, just old salt and a trace of tea leaf grit that's clung behind your teeth since break. When the final whistle screams again, short, sharp, merciful, you'd not even flinch. You just slip your hammer onto its shelf, wipe your palms on your coat, and let your boots drag you back into the yard where it already slides its gray arms around the brick walls. You think about home, if you can call for drafty boards into hearth home. But mostly, you think about what's waiting there, maybe another crust. Maybe the same stale scrap you tucked into a tin on the windowsill this morning and prayed no mouse would find first. As you file out with the other lads, shoulders brushing yours like cattle funneled through a pen, you catch a scent so faint you almost think you've imagined it. But there it is again, warm, thick, smoky. A curl of something meatier than your usual scrap of fish or your gritty porridge. You veer from the line that pushes toward the main gate and follow your nose to the side street where the brick widens just enough to wedge in a half-minus broken wooden stall. Behind it stands a woman wrapped in 3 shawls and a bonnet pulled so low it hides half her face. She's tending a battered iron pan perched on a coal brazier that pops sparks at her ankles. Inside that pan, strips of something brown and greasy, flicking tiny sizzles of fat onto the iron rim. Bacon, tiny. Real bacon, or close enough that your mouth waters before you even get your boots near the stall. You fumble your pocket. No coin. You left the last copper with the kettle man and the fishmonger's basket. You glance around, hoping for a stray fig of luck, maybe a mate to flick you a half-minus penny. No such fortune tonight. But the woman sees you. She doesn't scowl or wave you off. She stabs the tip of her knife into the pan, lifts a strip between the blade and her cracked fingernail. She tips her chin, like go on and don't stand there drooling holes in my night air. You step closer, let the warmth from the brazier lick at your coat. She doesn't hand it to you. She lays it flat on the edge of the stall. An invitation or a test, who knows? You pinch it between thumb and forefinger, careful not to drop even the smallest bead of fat. It hits your tongue warm. The first thing today that feels like it remembers what fire tastes like. It's stuff at the edges, nearly black where the pan seared it thin, but the middle has a pocket of salt and grease that melts straight down your throat. You close your eyes for half a heartbeat. Pretend you're someone whose breakfast plate doesn't come wrapped in someone else's stale newsprint. Some historians argue whether the Pooh really ate bacon much at all. Some swear it was a Sunday minus only luxury, when the good cuts went to the gentry and the trimmings to the lucky few. Others say scraps and offcuts, streaky ends worse old by the ounce at corner stalls like this, sizzled up cheap to bait empty pockets. You believe all of them. Because this bit of bacon isn't a breakfast, it's a whisper of what breakfast could be if you ever caught more than the ends. You nod at the woman. She doesn't smile. She flicks her knife at the pan, carving off another sliver. You dig your hand into your pocket, come up with nothing but a crumb so small it mocks you. But she just shrugs, slips the next strip onto the stall's edge anyway. No charity, you're just a bargain she'll remember later when you do have a penny. You chew slower this time, feeling the grease slip along your gums, your tongue pressing every drop into the back of your teeth. One of the older boys from the yard ducks in beside you. Palms his coin to her without a word, gets a thicker cut in return. He tips you a grin, a flash of teeth you know are half gone to sugar rot. He doesn't care HES, chewing like tomorrow isn't his problem yet. You lick your thumb when you're done. It tastes like fire and salt and the kind of comfort you know won't follow you home. But it's often's the edge of the hunger for now. Enough to get you through the walk back to your corner of town, or coal smoke drifts under doors and tomorrow's crust waits on a shelf if the mice haven't claimed it first. You step away from the stall as the woman slides her knife back into the pan, carving the next bit for the next boy who's willing to trade a coin or a favor, or just a look that says "I'll pay you back next time, miss, honest." You shove your hands deep into your pockets, boots stamping a slow beat back toward the alley that LL spit you out near your door. Behind you, the smell of cheap bacon clings to your collar, a promise that tomorrow you'll come sniffing back if you can scrape up enough to trade. Some say the breakfast table in the Victorian worker's house was just bread and wheat tea. And mostly, that's true. But sometimes when luck is kind or the butcher's scraps are plenty, you get a strip of firelight as seared salt to remind you what a real morning could taste like. And tomorrow, if you're smart, you'll remember the stall's smell, the sizzle of the brazier, the way that woman's knife flicked through scraps like it was splitting hope from hunger one slice at a time. You tuck your chin deeper into your collar as you slip back onto the main street. That taste of scorched bacon fat clinging to the back of your teeth like a secret you're not quite ready to swallow. The sky's gone from dull iron to inky blue, the lamps sputtering to life one by one, spitting a thin pool of yellow on the wet stones beneath your boots. You pass rows of houses stacked shoulder to shoulder, their windows flickering with the same feeble firelight you'll see in your own grate tonight if there's coal left in the box and someone remembered to pinch a bit of kindling. Through one cracked door you catch the sound of a baby fussing, someone muttering curses that never rise above a hush. You keep your head down. You've got your own worries to carry. You hook a right down an alley that cuts between two brick stacks. It smells like rotty rolled vegetable peelings, stale beer dribbling from a cracked barrel. But there's a comfort in that stink if you know where to look. Because right where the bricks meet the broken fence, a handful of kids squat on their haunches, busy over a basket that's half shadow, half treasure chest. You closer, your boots crunching over bits of splintered crate. One boy spots you, lifts his chin in greeting without lifting his hands. HES busy, so are the others. And in the middle of them, a pile of potato skins, carrot tops, the green ends of onions. Nothing fancy. Just peelings scavenged from behind the Grennergoser's stall after he locks up for the night. You drop into a squat, your knees cracking. One of the girls nudges the basket so you can see properly. There's a scrap of cold lard smeared on a bit of rag. They're taking turns dip the peel in the lard, roll it in the salt scraped off an old fish barrel. Chew like it's the queen's roast. She offers you a bit without a word, your share for tonight. Some historians call this peasant thrift. They say the working poor were resourceful, clever, nothing wasted, everything turned into something else. They make it sound noble on paper. But you know the truth, you don't dip potato skins in fish salt because you're clever. You do it because your ribs hate the echo of your own belly growling at night. You pluck a strip of peel from the basket. Feel the cold grease between your fingers, the rough grit of old salt clinging to your thumb. You run it along your teeth like you're scraping the day's filth off your tongue. Then you chew. The lard clings to the roof of your mouth. The salt burns the soft spot behind your front teeth, and for a moment it's enough to hush the worst of the emptiness. One boy wipes his nose on his sleeve and cracks a grin. He tells a half-minded story about his da once sneaking a whole boiled potato from the dock from an dinner pot, hid it in his cap, hid it behind the coal shed in 3 bites. Never tasted anything better, he swears, even though HES never had a taste of meat to compare it to. A girl next to you pipes up that Irma used to boil potato peels twice, first to make broth, then again to soften them for breakfast. By the time you got the last chew, they'd gone from peel to mush to memory. Historians still argue about that, you mutter under your breath. And she giggles so quick it almost feels like warmth. You lick the last smear of lard off your fingertips. The taste will stick long after the salt's gone, a ghost of a meal that never really existed in the first place. Acre traddles past at the alley's mouth, 2 men perched on the flatbed, shouting about spoiled cabbages bound for the pig yard. One of the kids perks up at that. Maybe they'll follow the cart tomorrow, try their luck for a stray leaf or two before the pigs get there first. You push yourself upright, knees popping again. You pass the basket back to the girl who offered you your bite. She wraps it up neat in a square of old cloth. Knots it tight, she'll tuck it away somewhere dry for tomorrow, or for whoever's belly starts crying the loudest first. You shove your hands deep in your pockets. They're slick with a shine of leftover fat, and for once you don't wipe it off. Let it stick. Let your sleeves carry that faint whisper of grease all the way home. Some scholars argue whether this counted as a meal at all, if it had calories worth counting, if it was just hunger dressing up in scraps and salt. But you know better. You know it was a promise tomorrow you'll stand in this same alley if you must, break bread with the same cold fingers, chew on the same peels that remind you you're not the only one scraping hope off the bone. You step back into the street, shoulders hunched as the night folds tighter around your coat. The lamps flicker overhead, each one a tiny star pin to load a wish on. Still, you wish anyway, may tomorrow's peel be softer, the salt a touch sweeter, the hunger a little quieter come dawn. You pull your coat tighter as the wind whips around the corner, dragging the smell of the river through the streets, says, a mix of coal smoke and brine that settles in your hair no matter how hard you shake it off. Your boots step out a rhythm on the cobblestones, echoing down the lane as you slip past shuttered shops and doorways full of sleep minus heavy snores. Your belly, half minus quieted by lard minus slick peels and salt scraps, starts to stir again when you see the glow ahead. The corner where the street bends around the old bakery's cracked brick wall. If you're lucky and tonight you feel just foolish enough to hope you might catch a whiff of the day's last batch of loaves, still warm enough to make your throat ache with want. There's a queue already, mostly men and older boys like you, shifting from foot to foot to keep the cold from climbing into their boots. Some hold copper coins tight in cracked fists. Others carry nothing but hope and the courage to beg the baker's wife for the bits to burnt or to stale to sell tomorrow. At the front of the line, a barrel-chested man waves a bent penny at the boy behind the counter, who looks like he'd rather be anywhere else. You edge closer, sniffing for the promise of Easton Dashin, that soft, rare miracle. A loaf you can tear without snapping your teeth. But that's not what most folks he really cove for not tonight. What they're watching for is the yellow crock on the shelf behind the boy. It's not butter. Not exactly. It's dripping scrapings from the roasting pans of someone richer than you'll ever be. Fattened meat juices cooled into a yellowish smear that can be spread thin as air across dry bread. When the boy finally lifts the crock, the line sighs like a tired horse. A few men shift forward, coins ready. You press closer, shoulder to shoulder with a lad no older than 12 whose coat sleeves flap loose around hands that should still be playing marbles instead of jostling for leftover grease. One at a time, they push a crust or half a bun across the counter. The boy behind it dips a blunt knife into the crock, scrapes out the thinnest line of fat, drags it across the bread with a swipe so fast you almost miss it. He folds the bread closed like a letter and flicks it back next. When it's your turn, you slide a palm-sized wedge of yesterday's crust onto the counter. It's stiff, a corner chipped like a broken brick. The boy's knife scrapes the crock's bottom. There's barely enough left to color the bread's edge, but it's enough. You take it back with a nod, shuffle aside so the next man can shove his bun forward. Some scholars call this mock butter. They'll argue in books about whether the working poor ever really used dripping for breakfast, or if that's a myth we tell ourselves now. But you know better. You know how the salt sticks to your fingertips, how the fat soaks your dry crust just enough to fool your mouth into thinking you're eating something rich. You tear the edge with your teeth, tongue pressing the smear against your gums. It's cold by now, no warm melt, no soft slide, just cold. Salty, fat, and stale crumb that clings to the roof of your mouth when you breathe too deep. Beside you, the boy with the flapping sleeves sucks his thumb clean, chasing the last dot of grease off the crust's edge. He catches your eye and grins. You grin back. What else is there to do when hunger's funny like that? A horse CL ops passed outside, who's spitting sparks on stone. The baker's wife appears from the dark behind the oven, wiping her hands on her apron that's more flour than cloth by now. She says something you can't quite hear. The boy's shoulders slump. The crock goes back on the shelf, empty until tomorrow when some other pan's scraps might refill it again. You slip away from the counter, crust cupped in your palm like something delicate. The taste clings to your tongue. A promise that tomorrow you might find a bigger scrap, a thicker smear, or maybe, if luck's gentle, a real knob of butter, though you're not fool enough to bet on that. You push back into the night, coat collar high, crust balanced between your teeth as your hands find your pockets. Some say the drip of fat on bread was enough to keep a man upright on 12-hour shifts. Some say it was all he needed to stand another day under the mill's roar or the loom's endless rattle. You think maybe both are true, because this bite thin, salty, stubborn, carries you step by step past the shuttered stalls and cracked windows until you reach the narrow lane that bends toward home. And when you slip through your door and drop your coat by the hearth, you'll press your thumb along the crust's rough edge, scraping the last ghost of fat onto your tongue before you lie down and dream of tomorrow's line, tomorrow's smear, tomorrow's. Your door creaks on its stired hinge as you shoulder it shut behind you. The warmth inside is thin, just a single coal in the grate, burning low under a cracked iron pot that's empty but for a smear of old broth dried on its bottom. Your coat slips from your shoulders and lands on the chair by the hearth, the last crumbs of your dripping crust tumbling onto the warped floorboards. You stoop to catch one before it disappears between the cracks. Waste not. Your mother's voice echoes from somewhere deep in your bones, though she's long gone to the mill shift that runs through the night. You pop the crumb onto your tongue, press it to your teeth like a dare, and pretend it's a meal that could fill more than the hollow behind your ribs. You tug your boots off with your toes. They hit the floor with a dull thud, stiff with dried mud and streaks of soot that will never fully wash out. You glance at the pot again. Some nights there's stew if you're lucky. Maybe a shred of cabbage leaf, the floating pearl of barley, a stolen curatin if you manage to trade a favor or two. Your hand drifts to the shelf by the hearth, fingers brushing past a cracked mug, a bent spoon, and there, half minus hidden behind an old tin, a battered jar with a lid that doesn't quite close. Inside, a smear of jam. Blackberry, at least, that's what the label once promised. Now it's mostly seeds, sugar crystals stuck to the glass like stubborn barnacles. Sweetness if you're willing to scrape. You pop the lid with your thumb. A faint whiff of sour fruit drifts up. Tart old, but not spoiled enough to turn your stomach. You dip your finger in. Swirl it around the bottom where the last sticky bits cling. When you pull it out, the smear on your skin barely counts as a mouthful, but it glows purple in the firelight like something richer than it is. Some say jam was a treat for Sundays only, a luxury spooned onto soft bread when the neighbors came round pretending life was tight. But here in this room, under this cracked ceiling, jam is a secret you keep for nights when you can't quite stand the taste of stale crust and cold peels alone. You tap the jar against your lips, licking your finger slow. The seeds crunch under your teeth, tiny bursts of sharp that remind you this is fruit in name only. Still, the sugar sparks on your tongue, a flicker of warmth that doesn't come from the hearth's tired coal. Outside, footsteps slap the stone's boots heavier than yours, voices low and quick. Neighbors drifting home from the late shift, clutching scraps in folded paper or baskets half minus full of nothing. The lane beyond your door smells like damp wool and coal ash. The city's breath rolling in under the frame no matter how tight you pull the latch. You set the jar back in its place, lid balance crooked, a promise you'll chase the last taste tomorrow if you need to. You wipe your finger clean on your trouser knee, though a bit of the sugar grit clings to your skin like stubborn hope. Historians argue if jam ever truly counted as a working man's breakfast. They'll say it was rare to dear for your sort. Maybe they're right. Maybe they'd change their mind if they saw you tonight, hunched over a chip jar like it's a crown jewel, scraping sweetness from the shadows, while the rest of the city dreams of putting pies and buttered toast you'll never hold in your hand. You stretch your legs toward the hearth, toes brushing the cold brick. The single coal cracks with a faint his sun more breath of warmth before it dies and leaves you to the night's chill. Tomorrow, you'll wake before dawn. You'll check the jar. Maybe there's enough left for one more scrape. Maybe the pot will hold a shred of something worth chewing. Maybe not. But tonight, there's a spark of sugar between your teeth and the soft hum of the street outside to lull you toward sleep. You tuck your knees to your chest, rest your chin on your arm, and let your breath slow. The taste of blackberry, more seed than fruit, lingers like a quiet promise, not enough to fill you, but enough to remind you you're still here. And in the half-minus sleep that follows, when the window frame and your boots whisper of tomorrow's walk through soot and stale bread, you dream of something sweet enough to wake up for one more smear of jam, one more bite of hope. When you stir awake, the faint taste of yesterday's blackberry grit still clings to your tongue, sweet turned stale overnight, like a ghost that forgot how to slip out with the last dream. You push yourself upright on the straw mattress, back creaking like the floorboards under your feet as you stand. There's no lamp burning now, just the sickly glow of dawn leaking through the grime on your single window pane. Outside, the city hums awake on an empty stomach. Somewhere down the alley, a door bangs shut. Someone else already chasing the day's first crumb. You hunch over the hearth, toes curling against the cold flagstones. The coal's long dead, the pot hangs useless, a black mouth yawning at your wishful stare. You tap the side with your knuckle hollow. No broth left from yesterday. No scrape of potato stuck to the bottom. Just ash and the echo of your mother's voice telling you always check, even when you know better. So you do. One finger dips into the jar on the shelf just in case, that the sugar crystals are gone, scraped clean in your sleep minus hungry days the night before. You lick your fingertip anyway, catching only the dusty scent of what used to be sweet. No matter, your boots find your feet. You jam your toes forward, wiggle them against stiff leather that's given up pretending to be soft. The street outside welcomes you with wet stone and the breath of coal smoke drifting from chimneys that still remember how to hold a flame. You keep your head low, shoulders hunched. You're not the only one who woke hungry today. You can see it in the way every pair of boots shuffles quick but never too quick, always watching, always sniffing the air for that drifting promise bread, soup, anything warm enough to trick your gut. Halfway down the lane, you find it. A boy not much older than you, perched on a 3-legged stool that looks like it survived more winters than both your lives put together. In front of him, a dented tin pot resting on bricks, steam curling lazy around the rim. HES selling coffee, if you can call it that. 8-in mug half- full of something brown and bitter, boiled from beans that have been through a grinder twice and reused until they're more grit than grounds. Burnt, sharp, just shy of pleasant, hooks you by the nose and pulls you closer. You fish in your pocket for the copper you don't really have to spare. When you drop it in his palm, the boy doesn't look you in the eye, just nods, dunks the ladle deep, and pours you half a mug that rattles warm between your palms. Historians write that Victorian workers were mad for coffee like it was a luxury, a little rebellion against tea and its polite veneer. But you know better. You know this brew isn't roasted fresh in any fancy shop. It's scrap grounds, dust, maybe a pinch of chicory or barley husk to stretch it out. Bitter as shoe leather. Still, it's warmth. Still, it's something that hums in your bones when your belly won't. You lean against the wall. Sip careful. The liquid scalds your tongue before it turns to ash in your mouth, sharp, black, with a note of metal that tastes like the tin it simmered in. You swallow anyway, and the heat slides down your throat like a tiny coal stashed under your ribs. Beside you, a woman pulls hers all tighter, clutching her own cup like it's a secret. She slurps loud, sighs louder. Better than nothing, she mutters to no one in particular. You nod. Chest right. You glance into your mug. Half gone already. The boy behind the pot doesn't glance up, just dips his ladle again for the next grim line of boots and empty hands. Some say coffee gave workers energy to stand another 12 hours by the loom or the hammer. Others say it kept bellies quiet just long enough to forget they were empty. Scholars still bicker about it, whether it was a blessing or a vice. You think maybe it's both. A bit of grit for the tongue and the pride. A bit of warmth so you can stand straighter when the foreman talks fast. Your last sip slides past your teeth. Lukewarm now, tasting more like old pipe water than beans. You tip the mug back. Catch every drop. Flick your thumb around the rim to snag the grit sticking stubborn in the bottom. You pop it onto your tongue like chewing ash, but it's something. Something is always better than nothing. You hand the mug back to the boy. He nods, doesn't smile. Doesn't need to. You step away, breath steaming in the morning air, woods a notch quieter than they were an hour ago. Ahead, the factory gates loom, iron bars yawning wide to swallow you and your half-full belly whole. You roll your shoulders, run your tongue across your teeth to catch the last bitter edge of what passed for coffee, and tell yourself it'll hold you till the next scrap, the next cup, the next thin trickle of warmth to carry you through another clanging hour, and maybe tomorrow, if you're lucky, The pot will still be there. Maybe the boy will save you the scrapings from the bottom, the strongest sip, the warmest drop, the hope that tastes just enough like courage to call itself breakfast. You slip past the factory gates with the ghost of that bitter coffee still hugging the back of your throat. The iron clang of the yard door snaps shut behind you, trapping you in the hum and hiss of a dozen steam pipes and the muffled clatter of tools already awake before you are. Your boots find their place on the boards, same spot you've stood every day since your shoulders were narrow enough to slip through a crowd and scene. You tap your fingers against your hip, feeling for the tiny warmth that coffee left in your chest. It's already fading. The foreman's voice cuts through the rattle of the loom's short commands. No questions, no sympathy. He cares only that your hands keep moving and your head doesn't dip forward to rest on the beam like it wants to every 3 minutes. Around you, the air tastes of oil and scorched dust. Someone's coughing at the far end, a sharp bark that echoes in the rafters before it drowns under the squeal of metal spinning too fast for comfort. You roll your shoulders. Try to focus on the work. Try not to think about the ache gnawing your belly where the coffee heat used to sit. But your mind drifts, anyway, to a rumor that's floated down the line all morning. They say there's a new man out back, a vendor from the edge of the docks. Someone who carts in barrels from the fishmongers and butchers near the river. He doesn't sell the good cuts those vanish to fine houses will never see inside. He hawks the scraps. Skins, rinds, bones scraped so clean you can see daylight through them. Someone muttered at break that HES got scraps with sauce. Gravy so thin it's more salt water than fat, but enough to call the pot by the back gate a miracle while your belly's hollow as a cracked jug. You keep one ear cocked for the whistle that you slip out before the foreman's eyes swing back your way. It comes sharp and mean. A single blast that sends boots shuffling for the yard like ants scurrying for crumbs. Out back, the air is sharper wind dragging the smell of the river with it. You nose around the corner, boots skidding over wet cobbles until you see him, a squat man with arms like tree stumps and an apron streaked dark with stains that might be gravy, might be last week's sketch. Hard to tell and not worth asking. In front of him a barrel with a dented iron ladle propped across the rim. You peek over the edge. What waits inside is no stew, but it's something. Strips of fat curled like ribbon, scraps of cartilage bobbing in a thin broth that glistens only where the oil's given up the fight and floats in tiny rainbows on the surface. You shuffle closer, press your coin into his palm, your last for the day. He grunts, dunks the ladle deep, splashes a scoop into your dented tin cup. The smell hits first salt and smoke. The faint promise of meat that was probably chewed by someone else first. You don't care. You cup it close to your chest, warmth seeping through the tin into your fingers. You tip it to your lips. The first sip is thin, mostly brine, tasting like the river if the river had learned to dream of beef bones. But then a bit of fat hits your tongue, soft enough to chew once, twice, before it slips down your throat, leaving a trail of salt behind. A boy next to you swears his ma once called this brown soup, though you need kind eyes to see any color in it that was't murky gray. Historians write that the poor survived on broth and scraps making do. They say, as if the choice were noble, you know it was't choice at all. It was necessity disguised as thrift. You scoop a bit more with your thumb, chasing a shred of skin around the rim. The fat sticks under your nail. You lick it clean. The boy laughs, does the same with his own scrap. A moment later, his cup clangs empty against the cobble. He doesn't waste time, just wipes his mouth with his sleeve and shuffles back toward the yard. You're slower, letting the last drops roll around your tongue before they vanish. A streak of grease drips down your chin. You wipe it away with the back of your hand. Rub your thumb along your lips so the salt doesn't go to waste. The barrel man grunts again when you hand him the empty tin. He doesn't smile. Doesn't have to. He knows you'll be back. Everyone comes back when the whistle drives them out with nothing left in their bellies but air and a wish. You straighten up. Stretch your arms until your spine pops. The yard's full of boys like you, shoulders hunched, tin cups still warm from a scrape of bone fat that was quite enough to fill the hollow inside them. They don't speak much, they just nod, boots shifting on the stones, steam rising off the river's back like a sigh that never ends. Some scholars argue if these barrels really counted as food, if scraps and salt water could keep a man on his feet through 12 hours of hammer and loom. Maybe they did. Or maybe they just tricked your gut long enough for your hands to keep moving. You step back through the gate, cup swinging empty at your side. The foreman's eyes flick to you and then past you, already looking for the next boy drifting in with broth on his breath and a handful of dreams pressed flat under his coat. The factory swallows you up again. You roll your shoulders, flex your fingers. The warmth in your chest fades with every clang of the iron frame. Still, your belly's quieter than it was. And when dusk comes again, you'll know where the barrel waits. It's thin gravy swimming with scraps and salt, and a promise that tomorrow you'll scrape another coin from somewhere to buy another half hour of warmth. By the time the factory whistle coughs out its last weary call for the day, your hands feel like they belong to someone else, someone older, harder, someone whose knuckles have been scrubbed dry by more than just iron filings and steam. You flex your fingers as you shuffle out the gates with the others, boots dragging along grooves worn so deep by 1,000 feet before yours that your knees where the cobblestones remember every last one. The yard empties fast. Some lads drift off toward the riverfront, hoping for a stray fish got tossed from a monger's bucket. Others veer for the corner where the barrowman's thin broth might be scraped again, if there's even a mouthful left to beg for. You turn down the back lane that folds behind the workhouse wall. There's a rumor tonight, a whisper among tired shoulders and hollow bellies, that the bakery on the far end of the street sometimes leaves scraps out for the night watch to nab on his rounds. And if you're quick and quiet, sometimes those scraps don't make it to the watchman's pocket. You pull your coat collar up as the wind cuts across the stones, carrying with it the stink of hoarstone, damp coal, and just faintly something warm, yeasty, impossible. Bread. Real bread. You round the corner and there it is, the bakery's side, or cracked open just enough for the heat inside to spill out in a thin ribbon of gold. A stack of burlaps. Axe leans half minus collapsed against the wall. At their feet sits a basket empty, maybe, or maybe not. You edge closer, boots scraping quiet over the stone. You drop to a knee, fingers trembling a little as you nudge the top sack aside. There, a crust, half a heel of yesterday's loaf, edges hard but the middle's still soft enough to tear if you're careful. You break it loose, eyes flicking up the alley. No shout yet, no watchman-esque cough around the corner. Just your breath and the cold in the loaf in your palm, heavier than anything you've held all day. Some historians like to paint Victorian bread lines as orderly, proper cues, polite, if hungry families waiting their turn for charity loaves. But out here, no line saves you. Out here, you'll learn quick that bread never waits politely for you to show up. You take it when you can. Where you can, and if you're smart you chew fast and keep walking. You sink your teeth into the heel, right there in the shadows by the cracked door. The crust scrapes your gum, sharp as gravel, but the middle low. The middle, still soft enough that you can press it flat against your tongue and pretend it's fresh minus baked, of unminus warm. Buttered if you squint your mind just right. You tear another piece free, thumb digging a hollow in the crumb so you can scoop out the softest bit first. A rat's kid arrests past your boot. You flick the hard edge at it. Keep the middle for yourself. Even the rat knows better than to complain. They say the poor lived on bread and tea, bread and dripping. I didn't hope, but you know it's never just bread. It's a shield between your ribs and the ache that hums there every hour you stand by the loom. Chewed stale under a workhouse wall at dusk, that tomorrow might taste the same, maybe better if the scraps are generous. Eye cough breaks the silence up the lane. A shout next, clipped in close. You jam the last hung tine to your coat pocket, boot heel grinding the crumbs into the cobbles as you stand. Better a pocket full of crust than empty hands if the watchman rounds the corner with his stick swinging lazy through the fog. You slip into the darker edge of the alley, shoulder brushing the rough brick as you hug the lane's curve. Behind you, the bakery door squeals shut. The warmth dies out in a breath, replaced by the night's damp chill and the soft crunch of bread under your fingers. You pull it out again when you're sure no one's looking. Thumb scraping the last soft bit free. You hold it to your mouth, let it rest on your tongue like a secret worth more than a coin you don't have. Some scholars write that the working man's bread was coarse and rough, cut with chalk or sawdust if the baker was mean enough to cheat a hungry mouth. Maybe so. You've tasted worse. You'd eat worse still. You'd eat worse still. If it came to it, chalk's better than nothing. Chalk at least fills the hole. You pass the gas light on the corner, the flame sputtering in the breeze like it can't quite be bothered to keep watch tonight. Your boots stap down the last stretch of the lane. Your pocket is lighter now, half a crust left to tuck on the shelf by the hearth. A prize you'll break your fast with before the next dawn whistles you awake. One last bite under your tongue. You press it there until it melts soft and warm. Pretend it's fresh from the oven instead of the corner of a basket meant for someone who earns more than you do. You swallow slow, let the taste linger longer than it should. And tomorrow, you'll listen for the rumor again. Whispers of crusts by the door, of loaves meant for watchmen who don't always keep their pockets tight enough. Bread and hope. Hope and bread. That's enough for tonight. The heel of bread in your pocket bounces gently against your hip with every step, as if reminding you I'm here, I'm almost gone. The street stretches before you like a cold promise, row after row of brick houses leaning into each other, windows winking yellow with coal smoke and tired families trying to pretend supper fills more than it does. Your boots crunch over cinders and stray straw as you slip down a narrower lane that cuts behind the laundry yard. You know this path by heart, each dip where rainwater pools, each broken plank in the fence that rattles if you brush it too close. The lamp overhead flickers once, then sputters out, but you don't need its light. Your nose knows where you're going. Past the yard gate, under a low eave where an old crate leans half-minus rotten against the wall, is a boy no bigger than your shadow. His cap's pulled down over his ears, shoulders bunched up inside a coat that might be fit to winters ago. At his feet a shallow basket lined with scraps of cloth inside. A handful of eggs, pale and smudged, their shells flecked with stray feathers. You nod at him. Not saying a word, he nods back, eyes flicking once to your pocket. He knows. You know. He'll trade one egg for half your crust. No questions asked. Fair enough. A soft belly tomorrow is worth the chew of stale bread tonight. You break the heel in half, careful not to drop a crumb. He lifts one egg out of the basket, brushes off the fluff stuck to its side, presses it into your palm. His hands are warmer than yours. Must be been sitting on them while he waited for feet like yours to come along. You slip the egg deep into your coat pocket, wrap it in the same cloth you carried your bread in. Some call it egg money. The way working folk bartered for scraps, no coins. Just trades in the night when the big houses wear it watching. The scholars who scribble it down later will call it resourceful. You'd call it survival. Tomorrow, if the hearth holds a coal or two, you'll crack that egg into a chipped tin cup. Swirl it over the embers until it thickens into something soft and yellow that'll else slide warm down your throat. Maybe you'll pinch a pinch of salt from the bottom of the old tin that lies on the mantel, if it hast clumped to rock in the damp. You nod at the boy again. He doesn't say thank you, neither do you. Thanks don't fill bellies. He tucks the half-minus heel away, curls his shoulders tighter, waits for the next set of boots to scuff down this same lane looking for a trade. Your own boots carry you back toward the main street, one hand in your pocket guarding the egg like it's a coin too precious to spend. You pass the row of houses with washing lines draped like ghost banners, the smell of cheap stew and damp clothes drifting out the cracks around half minus open doors. Some say the working poor lived on eggs like rich men lived on oysters, small delicacies, stolen luxuries. But you know the truth, an egg is a coin you crack with your teeth when the rest of your purse is empty. Its warmth you can taste before the loon's whistle bites you awake. Your footsteps slow as you near your door. The lane's grown quiet behind you. The hush of a city that's used up its last scraps of chatter for the night. You slip inside. Shut the door gentle so the latch doesn't squeal. The hearth is cold. Of course it is. You cup the egg in your palm. Feel its smooth shell under your thumb. Tomorrow it will be something more than shell and trade. It'll be hope scrambled soft in the dark. You ease down onto your straw mat. The egg tucked safe in a fold of cloth by your side. Your stomach crumbles once, but it doesn't feel so loud now. You press your fingers against the cloth minus wrap prize and close your eyes, letting the thought of tomorrow's warmth hush the empty space behind your ribs. Some scholars will argue whether an egg for a crust ever really happened, whether folk were so poor they'd be swap breakfast for breakfast. Maybe they'll find proof. Maybe they won't. You could tell them the truth if they cared enough to ask. When your belly's hollow, you'll trade anything for one more warm bite at dawn. Tonight, you drift off slow, your breath mingling with the city's hum beyond the thin wall. And if you dream of the egg cracking open in your hands, the hearth flickering back to life, the tin cup hissing as it holds something soft and yellow and bright. And that's enough to hold the dark at bay, at least for one more night. The first frost bites at your cheeks before you even rub the sleep grit from your eyes. You tug your coat tighter around your ribs, fingers brushing over the place in your pocket where the egg slept warm all night safe. Oh, a promise you're not ready to crack just yet. Out in the lane, the dawn drips slow through the rooftops. Fog rolls off the river, slipping down the cobblestones like a lazy ghost that never quite leaves. You sniff once coal smoke, horse sweat, something sharper underneath. Hunger perks up like a dog sniffing scraps. You follow your nose, past the laundry yard, under a squeaking sign for a tailor shop that's never open when you need it. You find them the carts, to wooden barrows, walls patched with iron straps to keep them from splintering into the mud. Behind them, men and boys and women wrapped in shawls so thin you can see the steam of their breath leaking through the weave. One barrow rattles with tin muds. A battered kettle perches crooked on a bed of red coals that spits sparks every time the wind shifts. The man tending it has hands black at the knuckles, coal smudged into the line so deep he probably scrubs till his skin peels and still never gets clean. He nods at you, jerks his chin at a battered sign scrawled in chalk, hot tater broth halfpenny. The other barrow's got a pan balanced over coals, fat spitting from something that might once have been pork scraps, now mostly rind and skin that curl at the edges like burnt paper. You fumble in your pocket. The copper you tucked away last night is still there, cold and sharp between your fingers. The only thing standing between your stomach and the ache that's been humming low since dusk. You step to the potato man first. He cracks a grin when he sees the copper pinched tight in your palm. Like he's been waiting all morning for boots like yours to come along. He spears a half-minus burned potato off the coals with a stick so black it might as well be charcoal too. He plops it in your hand. Nods once. Mind the ash, he mutters, voice dry as the bread heel you traded yesterday. You blow across the skin. It splits under your thumbs, teen curls up, smelling of earthen soot, something faintly sweet under the char. You pinch off a bite with your fingertips, toss it past your teeth before the wind can steal the heat. Some historians claim street carts like these were the working poor's secret weapon, cheap, mobile, warm when the city turned its back. They don't always mention how many carts got chased off by the watchmen, or how easy it was for a cart to vanish overnight when the city fathers decided fresh air mattered more than empty bellies. You don't care about city fathers now. You care about the soft belly of the potato under its black skin, how it falls apart on your tongue with the faint promise that the cold grit at the edges won't crack your last good tooth. Beside you, a boy younger than you shuffles from foot to foot. HE's got no coat, just a scarf looped twice around his neck like a shield that never worked. He palms his own copper over to the man, cups the potato in his bare hands like it might burn him clean through. He catches your eye, grins through teeth that chatter anyway. You chew another bite slow. The wind claws at your ears, tries to steal the warmth that drips down your throat in tiny, starchy bites. You let it try. For once, you win. When the last mouthful sticks to your thumb, you lick it clean, picking stray ash off your lip with your sleeve. The man behind the barrow is already turning his stick through the coals, eyes scanning the fog for the next booted belly that needs something, anything, soft enough to hush the gnaw. You step aside. A splash of hot broth might be waiting in the kettle if your luck holds. The man dips a dented ladle in, drips a half-minus mug's worth into a chipped tin cup that's seen more cracked lips than you care to count. The smell hits you first: fat, onions maybe, pepper if you believe in miracles. You sip careful. The heat slides down your throat in a hurry, clinging just long enough to quiet the corners of your hunger that the potato missed. A cartwheel squeaks up the lane. A dog barks once, sniffing the coals with more hope than sense. The kettle man shoos it away with a flick of his ladle, splashing a trail of broth that hisses when it hits the bricks. Some scholars like to say street carts gave the poor choice, like you've got a menu tucked under your coat. You'd laugh if your belly was too busy swallowing its pride with the last sip of broth. Choice is simple here: you've got a copper or you don't. You've got warm broth or you don't. And tonight you'll dream about another potato. Maybe softer, maybe bigger when the dawn drags you back to this same corner. Nose lifted for the curl of smoke that says not today. Hunger. Not today. You hand the tin cup back. The man dunks it into a pail of cloudy water, swirls it once for the next mouth to drink from. You rub your thumb along your palm, pressing the memory of warmth there until the chill sneaks back in to claim it. You roll your shoulders, hitch your coat tighter, and let your boots carry you away from the rattling barrows. Your breath puffing in the fog like a promise you're not quite ready to break. Your boots drag you away from the dying coals of the potato cart, the broth wan fading slow behind your ribs as the city exhales its dawn steam all around you. The street curves back toward the iron gates, the factory's breath already drifting skyward in pale gray ribbons that stick to the rooftops like frost that forgot how to melt. You pass a row of lads just like you, shoulders hunched, eyes half-minus closed, mugs clutched in mittenless hands that cradle half-minus cold tea like its treasure. Some sip careful, some gulp so quick they cough the steam right back out into the morning air. They stand clustered by the loading dock wall, where a single battered kettle rests over a stack of bricks someone pinched from the yard. This is the tea break, or at least the thing folks call a tea break, like it's something warm and proper you pour from a polished pot into porcelain cups, soft biscuits on a plate to catch the crumbs. But here, you know better. Here, tea is whatever the bottom of the tin holds after the overseer's wife weeps out the real leaves for her own table. You slip in next to a boy you know by face but not by name, his cap pulled so low you can't see his eyes, only the puff of his breath. He hands you a mug. It's chipped on one side, rim black where the fire lit it raw the last time someone boiled water too long. You nod your thanks, curl your fingers round it, and let the warmth sting your knuckles back awake. The ladle scrapes the kettle's bottom, clanking like it's tapping out the last beat of a tired song. The liquid that sloshes into your mug is more water than leaf. Brown if you squint, clear if you're honest. A scrap of something floats near the surface, a fleck of old leaf. Maybe, or a sliver of soot that fell from the kettle's underbelly when no one was looking. You sip. It's bitter in that way boiled twigs are bitter. Earthy, thin, a taste you wouldn't name tea unless you weren't desperate enough to lie to your own tongue. You swallow anyway, because hot water in your belly beats cold wind at your ribs every time. A girl slips in beside you, palms cupped around a smaller tin she pinched off someone's to last winter. She dips her pinky in and flicks something into her mouth. Powdered chalk, maybe, or the scrapings of old sugar that someone hoarded in a twist of paper and offered up for this one sip of sweetness. She catches your eye, shrugs like don't judge me, and you don't. Chalk's better than nothing. Sweetness better than none. Some say the factories gave out tea breaks to keep workers happy, an act of kindness, a mercy squeezed into the steel and steam. Historians scribble at meat. A small pause, a social ritual. They don't write about how half the leaves in your mug have already seen 6 kettles. 7 if you're unlucky. They don't mention the milk that never shows, or the sugar that gets stretched so thin you swear it's more dream than ration. Someone laughs, soft and rough. One of the older lads, tipping the last dregs of his mug back and licking the rim clean for good measure. He tells a half-minus story about the old man who once found a dead fly floating in his cup and called it extra flavor. No one flinch. A fly's just meat if you squint hard enough. And protein's protein when your belly's echoing down the line. You swirl your mug. Watch the leaf scraps spin lazy circles in the steam. When you lift it for another sip, it's lukewarm, already heat drifting off to join the city-ass fog before you're ready to let it go. Someone hisses hurry up, eyes darting toward the factory doors. The foreman's shadow flickers in the crack where the yard wall doesn't quite meet the gate. You tip the mug back, swallow the rest fast enough to make your teeth ache. It's half water, half wishful thinking, but it hums through your chest for a heartbeat before your ribs remember they're still hungry. You hand the mug back, nod once. The ladle clang casts the kettle's rim empty now. The boy with the cap flicks the last leaf scrap into the gutter where it joins the street's thin stream of sodden old rain. Some scholars like to dream that tea made the workers strong, braced them for 12 more hours of hammer and wheel. Maybe it just made you feel like you weren't alone at dawn, when the world turned gray and your belly forgot what a full mug tasted like. You wipe your thumb across your lips, press your hands to your coat's inside lining where the egg from last night still waits uncracked. Soft, a promise you're saving for when the sun's out of reach. The gate squeals open, boots shuffle back to the line. Steam spills out to meet you, hot and sharp, smelling of oil and iron and all the things your lungs will remember longer than your bones. You breathe once, deep, tasting tea leaf grit on the back of your tongue. Then you step forward, and the tea break fades behind you like the fog. The shift drags you back inside like a tide you're too tired to swim against. Iron squeals, belts rattle, and the steam hiss wraps around your neck like a wet scarf that never dries out. You grip the same hammer, lean into the same rhythm, listen to the foreman's boot stab past your shoulder like a slow clock reminding you time's not yours to waste. Your belly hums a low protest under your ribs. Thing tea and one burnt potato can't hush it forever. You reach into your pocket between swings, fingers brushing the cloth bundle where your egg waits. Still whole. You tuck it deeper, safe against your hip bone. Not yet. You promise it. Not yet. Hours scrape past like your knuckles on rough stone. Sparks drift when the iron bites back. Tiny stars that blink out before they reach the floor. You steal glances at the window high on the far wall, just a crack of gray light that doesn't warm anything. But at least it reminds you there's a world outside this clanging roar. When the final whistle growls its short bark for the end minus shift break, you're ready. Your knees creak as you stand straight, shoulders stiff from the weight you've carried since dawn. You press your palm to your pocket, feel the egg still nestled there like a tiny heartbeat. Back home. That's where your head drifts as your boots slap through puddles the factory pipes coughed up during the night. Home. A room no bigger than a coal shed, but tonight it holds that egg. Tonight you'll crack it open. Watch the yolk spill like a sunrise just for you. You push through your door at dusk, boots kicking dust from the step. The air thick with last week's ash. You nudge the coals with a stick, but they crumble to powder. There's no coal left in the box, just crumbs of black that stain your fingertips but won't catch a spark. You rub your thumb across the egg's smooth shell. Maybe it was not so bad. Your stomach doesn't care how it's cooked as long as it lands where it should. You kneel by your mat. Cradle the egg in your palm, thumb tracing its pale curve once, twice. Then you hear it. A soft scrape. A squeak to high to be boots on your threshold. A rustle near the wall where the cracked plank leaves just enough gap for cold air and small things to slip through. You freeze. Tilt your head. There by the old shelf, near the hearth, tiny feet cuddle across the floorboards. You spot the nose first. Whiskers, dark eyes blinking at you from the shadows. A mouse. 2. Maybe more, hidden behind the sack you use for a pillow. Your gut sinks lower than your knees. You edge closer, slow as the dawn. They're right behind the plank. You see it, your crust. The last till you saved last night, tucked on the shelf beside the tin cup you promised yourself you'd de-rinse for tomorrow's tea. Dawn. Not all of it, but close enough. Nibbled down to a scatter of crumbs and soft teeth marks where the mice have chewed through your best dream of tomorrow's first bite. You sit back on your heels, Joel working at a curse you swallow before it slips past your teeth. You can't eat a mouse. You can't fight a ghost that only comes when your eyelids drop. You can only stare at the crumbs, scatter them from your palm, watch them vanish into the cracks that gave you up in the first place. Some historians write that the poor coexisted with pests like old neighbors, rats in the rafters, mice under the floorboards, fleas in the blankets. They scribble it neat. Cozy urban life, creature companions. But you know there's nothing cozy about waking to a crust that's been gnawed to paper minus thin whispers. Nothing companionable about a night squeak that means your belly stays half empty while tiny teeth grow fat. You curl your fingers tight around your egg. The shell feels suddenly too thin, too easy to break. You stand. Pace twice, across the boards, toes curling in your socks to catch warmth from a hearth that's as dead as the coal you didn't buy. Your stomach snarls at the mice soft little bellies that don't care you earned that crust. That you traded your only copper for it while they slipped through the wall without a care in the world. They eat what you can't guard, and there's no watchman for this. You squat by the shelf again. Brush the crumbs into your palm. Study the tiny holes that led through the planks to the street. You tap one with your knuckle. The squeak answers you back. A soft laugh in the dark. You sigh. Let the crumbs trickle through your fingers like sifting sand. It's gone. Nothing to do but stand, roll your shoulders, and whisper to the egg that tomorrow it'll do what the crust cowled and fill the hollow spot for a moment. Maybe two, if you're careful. You cradle it back to its cloth nest, press it close against your side, and let the room fold quiet around you. The mice settle too, scurrying deeper into the wall, bellies full of your last stale bite. They don't thank you. They never do. And tomorrow, you'll guard the next crust better. Maybe. If you're lucky, if you're smart, if the hunger that waits behind your ribs doesn't chew you hollow before they ever get the chance. Morning creeps in, soft as set under the door. You lie on your back, staring at the splintered ceiling while your breath curls pale in the stale air. One hand rests on the egg, still cradled in its cloth, a fragile promise that feels heavier than a sack of coal when your belly growls loud enough to echo off the cold stone walls. You stand slow. Your knees protest, your spine cracks, your feet search for the warmth that never really lives inside your boots. You pocket the egg once more. One more hour, you whisper to it. One more chance to find something to go with it. Maybe a heel of bread you can bargain from a neighbor. Maybe a half-minus cup of drippings from the man 2 doors down who mops out the pub's back barrels when no one's watching. The lane outside is already alive with footsteps and the hiss of words half-minus swallowed by cold. You fall in line with the others boys and men. A few hunched women with shawls pulled tight, everyone headed the same way, the corner where the doors swing open wide enough to swallow a day's wages and spit you out half-minus warmed. The Ale House. They call it a tavern when they want to sound fancy. You know it as the place where pennies stretch thin and thick at the same time, thin enough to vanish before the week's out. Thick enough to numb your ribs when nothing else will. The door creaks wide, spilling out stale smoke, sour beer, and the sharp tang of yesterday's spills to soaking into floorboards that haven't been dry since your father's father stood here. Copper in his palm, hope in his gut. Inside it's warmer than the street. Not warm enough to call it comfort. Just warm enough to coax the shivers from your bones for an hour if you keep your elbows tight to your ribs. You drift toward the corner, to the battered bar where a jug slouches on a splintered shelf. The barkeep's eyes flick over your shoulder to the door, counting heads, counting coppers, counting trouble he'll throw out if it stirs louder than the hiss of the tap. You slide your coin across the sticky wood. He catches it under his thumb, tests its weight like HES, not sure it's real. Then he shrugs, tips the jug forward, and fills a cracked mug halfway with something so dark it swallows the light whole. Beer for breakfast. Not the thick stuff poured for the factory boss to streets over, no hops fragrant enough to dream on. No froth to slip under your nose like a promise. This is half-minus watered porter. Thin and sour, scraped from the bottom of yesterday's cask. A leftover that still calls itself drink because nobody's dared to say it isn't. You lift the mug, sniff once burnt grain, bitter yeast, the faint bite of something sharp that'll keep you awake if the hammer's weight doesn't. Some historians say the Victorian poor drank beer for breakfast because it was cleaner than the waterless chance of the pipes giving you the flux when all you really want is your belly quiet and your hands steady on the loom. They're right. And they're wrong. Because you don't drink this brew to clean your blood. You drink it to hush the part of your head that keeps counting the coins you don't have. You sit careful. The bitterness curls around your tongue, burns at the back of your throat just enough to remind you this isn't tea. It's not broth. It's not milk, sweet and thick like the bosses pour over porridge you'll never taste. It's just enough to soften the edge where hunger scrapes against your ribs. Enough to warm your fingertips as you hold the mug tight so no one bumps it loose. A man 2 stools down coughs into his sleeve. He lifts his own mug in your direction, a toast without words. A salute from one hollow belly to another. You tip your chin, sip again. The taste doesn't get better, but it does settle. It slides down slow, humming under your ribs, wrapping your belly in a coat of false courage that might just last till the next whistle. You press your palm to your pocket, feel the egg safe and drowned under the cloth. You imagine cracking it open on the hearth tonight, letting the yolk slide into a dented pan you borrowed from the neighbor 3 doors down. Maybe you'll dip a crust in the yellow if you're lucky. If the mice keep to their corners, if the fire holds out long enough for the shell to harden in your palm, proof you once ate something better than stale bread and cheap drink. Outside, boots scuff the step, new shoulders push through the door. The barkeep lifts his chin. Next round, next copper, same story. You tip the last sip back, swallow the bitterness that clings to your teeth. Some scholars say beer for breakfast was a sin or a shame, proof that the working poor cowled and hold their coppers tight enough to buy bread instead. Maybe they'd understand if they tasted this brew once, felt how it coats an empty belly like a light hold, gentle enough to believe for an hour or 2. You slide your mug back across the bar, press your hand over your pocket once more, and let the door swing open wide behind you. The wind greets you with its bite. The street hums its same old promise. Work waits. Hunger waits too. But for now, Your ribs hum warm enough to keep you standing. And the egg? Still safe. Still whole. One bite of tomorrow cradled in your coat while the rest of the city rattles its coins at the barkeep's jug. Same as you. You push through the door of your room just as the sun slides down behind the chimney stacks for good, leaving behind a bruised sky that seeps its cold through every cracked brick. The street's echo still hums in your ears, boots scuffing stone. The hush of breath clouding lantern light. The barkeep's jug clanking against tin mugs that rattled like hollow bells. Inside, the hearth greets you the same way it always does. Empty of flame, full of yesterday's ash that clings to your knees when you crouch down to wish it back to life. You brush the ashes with the side of your hand, half-minded hoping for buried coal with enough breath left to spark. Nothing. Just the scrape of cold brick under your palm. You pull the egg from your pocket. It's still warm from your body's stubborn hope, smooth under your thumb like polished stone. For a moment you just hold it there in the hush, cradled in the bend of your fingers as if it might hatch a miracle right there on your heart sign. You place it gentle in the dented tin cup you keep tucked by the grate. It wobbles once, settles into the curve like it knows it belongs to you and you alone. You reach for the old pan next. Tug it from its hook on the wall, a pan so thin at the bottom you could read the stars through it if you squid hard enough. No butter, no milk, no pinch of salt to coax the yolk into something soft and golden. Just the egg and your breath and a bit of stubborn heat that lines in your hands when the coals refuse to share theirs. You wrap the egg in your palm again, tap it oft on the rim. The shell cracks a sharp, tiny sound that echoes too big in the hush of your room. You tip it out into the pan. Watch the yolk pool in the shallow dip, bright as a lantern flame if you pretend the shadows away. Some historians say the working poor treasured eggs as tokens of hope tucked away for Sunday or a holiday morning when the bell didn't bring you back to the hammer or the loom. They'll scribble notes about how the rich stacked them in baskets, how the rest of you counted one by one. Soft shells traded for coppers or crusts when the belly growled too loud to hush with scraps alone. They never say how it feels when the shell breaks in your hand. How the yolk swarms tolls between your cracked fingertips. How you tip your head down close, nose inches above the pan, to catch the smell before it vanishes into cold air that wants to swallow it whole. You set the pan on the hearth, nudge a splinter of wood under it just enough to coax a lick of flame from a match you found behind the bread tin last week. The wood smolders stubborn, a single thin tongue of heat that flickers under the yolk as if it knows it's not enough. You bend low, cup your hand around the flicker. Breathe slow and steady until it gives you 3 minutes of warmth. Maybe 4. The egg widens at the edges curl gold where the pan bites back. You tip the pan to your lips when the last of the flame gutters out. The yolk sliding across your tongue warm and soft as a promise you almost believe. You lick the tin clean, scrape the last white smear with the edge of your thumb. Press it to the roof of your mouth like you can squeeze one more taste from the ghost of your breakfast -B. Outside, the street coughs up its last scraps of night. Aid or slams. Boots shuffle past your wall. Somewhere a child cries into the hush, and other belly wanting what yours just swallowed in one careful bite. You rest the empty shell on the shelf by the hearth. The cracked tips cup together like they're still whole. Maybe tomorrow you'll crush them fine, scatter the dust into the cracks by the floorboards to tell the mice you've still got scraps worth stealing. You settle back onto your straw, boots still on, cold trapped tight. Your fingers find the edge of the pan where the metal's gone cool again. You tap it once, twice, like you're thanking it for doing what the coals could not. Some scholars say hope kept the poor alive as much as bread did. Maybe they're right. Maybe tonight. It's the same scrap of warmth under your ribs, a taste of yolk that hums in the quiet, where your hunger used to live. You close your eyes. You let the night roll over your shoulders like a blanket made of fog and coals set in tomorrow's promise of another crust, Another ladle of broth, another scrap small enough to trick your belly for one more day. And if you dream, let it be soft. Let it taste like warmth. Let it drift you slow and steady toward a dawn where you wake up with something more than empty pockets and a cracked shell. You breathe out once, steady and quiet, and let your hunger hush itself to sleep. And now, as your breath drifts softer than the street's hush, the last hunger dims to a gentle ache. Your hands curl around an egg that hasn't cracked yet. A promise tucked warm against your side while the lamps outside flicker out one by one. You did well tonight. You traded wisely. You chewed slow. You guarded every crumb like it mattered because it did. Because tomorrow waits on the other side of sleep, with one more chance to warm your belly and hush the growl that's followed you through the soot and steam. Let the walls hold you close now. Let the city's distant hum fade to a whisper. Let your ribs rest soft around a dream of warmth that doesn't vanish with the dawn. Sleep. Small hope. Sleep, steady heart. The egg is safe. The morning will come.